All right. So I'm about to start talking about some of the stuff that I know a lot of you guys want to hear. Crow recently did an epic episode at crow777radio.com, 2 R's in it, crow777radio.com, about the sun we cannot see. So if you have, I know a lot of you will have questions, and if you have questions, you can super chat them to entropystream.live/app/Owen Benjamin Comedy, because this is one of the most interesting things, and also oddly intuitive. Oddly intuitive. Like when he started talking about it, it sounds totally crazy, but like my inner tuning fork, my inner knowing was like, yeah, that checks out. And so let's talk about this. This is very, very interesting stuff. So how did this all happen, and what is going on with that second sun?
Well, ironically, it started with the moon. I had been upgrading equipment, which is ironic. I couldn't even pay my rent, but I just didn't care anymore.
Yeah.
So I was getting equipment. And by the way, a lot of that equipment was through community support back at the time, a couple cameras and some other things.
Yeah, me too.
But I had a full spectrum camera, and I noticed, I would get bored. You know, you're staring at the moon, nothing's happening, and you've already put in 6 hours a night, so you start wandering around the sky. And I had this full spectrum camera, and I found a bright spot in the sky, I don't know, like a third of the sky away from where the full moon was. I'm thinking, what the hell is that? And I'm thinking, well, is that a reflection of the full moon off the firmament? I couldn't figure out what it was. So a few nights later, I got bored again. So I'm going around. I'm going to see if I can find that. I found it. So this happens a lot of times.
Yeah.
So finally, I get to the point where I've got my hydrogen alpha solar scope, and I'm filming. And same thing as always. You're frying out there in the sun. Nothing's going on. You're not catching anything interesting. So I said, I wonder if I could find a bright spot in the sky. So that's how I accidentally found the sun we don't see, or what I call the spiritual sun, because I think it's been described before by Christian mystics, probably, and probably Hermeticists too. But when I first did it, I thought, oh my God, that's got to be lens flare. So I did all these tests, which a guy later who replicated will do. I took the tube, I did light obliteration, I did all these things to try to prove it's not lens flare. I spun the double stack on the end of the telescope, and in my gut, I was reasonably sure this is the real deal, but I only had a few hundred hours of solar time, thousands of hours of lunar time.
Right.
So I was afraid to say what I thought was correct. So then time went on, and then I started to think, this is real. So I kind of asserted myself. Then some years later, Chris Van Maitre replicates it in Colorado exactly. It's even in the same place when he does it. And at that point, I'm okay, cool. I expected this to happen a lot sooner, but finally someone else has done it. Well, turns out he does it in Colorado, and you could do it anytime with the right tools, I think. You might even do it with your naked eyes at sunset, but he does it again in Houston, and then at the Solar Return Festival, Jason gets him on the phone with me because Jason's there, and he's all, are you going to start shooting? I said, well, I'm 2 years away from my surgery. I'm not supposed to pick up real heavy things, but I think I'm ready. I think I'm good. So I'm gonna, and the first thing I want to do is get a polarized filter, put it over the end of the solar scope, and do some tests. And he's, oh my God, Cami Nodell's here. She's got like 150 of these things. They're all giant, and I've got my solar scope. Next day, they go shoot the sun you don't see, which incidentally is now exactly opposite of where we both shot it in the spring years before. It's below the sun we see. And they take a single sheet of polarized filter, they put it on the sun you don't see, the spiritual sun, and they twist it, and it eclipses. It disappears.
Whoa.
Which you can't do to the sun we do see, which ironically, if we're all correct in everything we think we have right, means the sun we do see is, for all lack of better terms, an illusion, and the sun we don't see is the physically existing thing.
Wow. Yeah, because that woman that was on your show, all that polarization stuff I found really interesting, and especially that experiment she did with the quarter, where it would make a hologram, and you could make the hologram colder or warmer depending on what you did to the quarter. Can you explain any of that?
Well, that's, this is part of where science leads us astray. And by the way, now think about when they start doing holographic telecommunications, where the person standing there will have body heat. because that's coming. But so what you're seeing is the properties. It's, you know what? If you took that, so the toy we're talking about looks like a little spaceship with a hole in the top, and inside it there's a concave mirror. You take a coin and you stick it down in the bottom, and then it looks like there's a coin floating over the top, but the coin on top is the hologram, basically.
Yeah.
The real coin's down. So if you took that, flipped it upside down, and put it over your head, the hologram would be the sun, and the coin would be the actual spiritual sun. But and again, we talked about that. If you took the polarizing filter, if it had a magnetic field strong enough, then the real coin would eclipse, and the hologram would not, with the polarizing filter test.
Yeah, and mainstream science, because here's the thing, Made by Jim Bob talks about this a lot. That awesome cartoonist. I don't know if you know him, but he's hysterical.
I do.
Yeah, and he talks about how the scientific method is still great. You know, you observe, you come up with a experiment, you isolate variables, you do experiments based on the variables, and then you come up with a hypothesis. You try desperately to prove it wrong, theory, blah blah blah. Okay, what mainstream is doing is not that science fiction. They observe something, and then they come up with a story that could make that possible. You know, Arthur C. Clarke and all these people, they pretty much, in my opinion, started this modern idea of science being, can you come up with a story that makes this make sense? It's almost
sci-fi. Sci-fi is the root of science.
It's sci-fi, yeah. But underneath that is still science, where science is observing, you know, variables, doing hypothesis, testing, all that. And so, I can't remember what I was just talking about. Was it about the hologram? Oh, but this is, I lost my train of thought. I was so excited. But oh yeah, well then you'll see these guys, these main guys like Neil My Ass Tyson and Pikachu and all these guys, and they openly say they don't do any scientific experiments. One guy said, quote unquote, me and none of my colleagues do ever use the scientific method. And
so the parents. So the parents, right? That's what it makes them, a parent.
Exactly. And so all this stuff that's coming out is so interesting, and I'm so glad that people like you guys are doing it, because it makes sense that is possibly what it is. And so Psalm 19:1, which is 9/11 encoded, I don't know if that's just happens in nature or that's encoded, but you know, talking about the firmament, which a lot of modern Christians conveniently forget about or just, you know, not address. Do you think the sun we do see is the reflection inside the firmament, and the sun we don't see is outside? Is that what you guys were talking about?
I would put it this way. What I currently envision as my working way to think about it is the sun we do see is on this side of the firmament. The sun we don't see is on the other side of the firmament. But have you ever seen those line drawings, those old woodcuts, Masonic drawings? They're like Mason trace boards. I think they're called woodcuts. There's like line drawings. And it's a good example because they always have like clouds up the top. There'll be a hole through the clouds, and somewhere out of the picture, this light rays are coming through, and they are sourcing the moon and the sun.
I've never seen those, but that's cool.
You can look them up. It's easy. I think it's Masonic trace boards or woodcuts. But this is the idea that I work with when I think about it now. But I was going to say something else you had brought up. Let me think about that. I forgot.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about this, the hologram changing energy, another thing that blew my mind about that stream you did is that cold isn't the absence of heat. It's another energy. Can you explain that?
Science will tell you that cold is the absence of heat. An old alchemist will tell you that everything that exists vibrates, and if a thing is cold, it's to its vibration rate. And so that kind of answers your hologram question too, right? So if we took a coin and concave mirrors or convex or whatever the hell it is, projects that hologram-like image, well, what's it done? What's it projecting? Well, it's energy, it has to be, right? We can see it. And so light has a vibration rate, and everything about what's being projected has a vibration rate. Why is it so surprising that the temperature might be part of that translation? Because it too is a vibration rate.
I just had an interesting thought. What if all this temperature testing is to make sure that people's vibrations are dropping?
Well, not only that, they're shooting a red gun at your third eye. Think about it.
Oh yeah, I also think that's it's what's it called? It's how I would do animals. It's not grooming, conditioning. So if you get someone conditioned, if you get parents conditioned to someone in a mask holding a gun to your child's forehead, if that they can just swap out the gun and no one would react. I do it with cow. I don't slaughter my cows; they're milk cows, but I use a red bucket to like get them to go a certain place, and now I don't even have to put grain in the bucket. It's the bucket that they're conditioned to.
As I was telling you, my hair is halfway down to my butt because I'm not playing some barber going to take my temperature and put a mask on me to cut my hair. This is a thing that I always kind of felt like I needed, but I don't need a haircut. And if it gets to be a pain, I told you, I'll go Marine Corps on my own head or, get someone else to cut it. But it's not a thing that I need. And I'm getting used to it because I suspect someone as myself will not be allowed to get on planes unless I want to do a legal fight before too long. There may be other things. And, people like Alphonse, heroes of the time. But for me, I can't do that. I don't want to be engaged with places like that. I just want to be completely free and clear
I'm the same
of
way,
all that. Yeah. So if I have to, what I will do is do the legal fight. But if I can just not use the service, then that's the way I'll go.
Well, by that time, I'll have my airships going. They're going to be called bear ships, so I'll always give you a ride.
Okay, you got to talk for a second.
Okay? Oh, I was just saying. By that time, we'll have our bear ship fleet running on banned helium. So I'll just pick you up and give you a ride whenever you need one. Don't you think that? Let me read a couple super chats while you do whatever you're doing. All right. It's awesome. Crow mentioned the sun appearing like a portal when he was sun gazing. John 10:9. I am the door. That word door there can be translated as portal. That's excellent point, Swanee. When Crow comes back, we'll talk about that.
Sorry, I had to take that. My car's getting serviced.
Oh, no worries, brother. I talk 2 hours a day by myself, so I just change gears. Someone said, it's awesome Crow mentioned the sun appearing like a portal when he was sun gazing. John 10:9. I am the door. That word door there can be translated as portal. Any thoughts on that?
Well, in Spanish, that's, think about how you would say these words in Latin-based language. I always try to do that. For anyone who speaks Spanish or Italian, think of the words that you're using when you talk about a door, puerta, or think about an airport, how you would say that in the other languages. But truly, if you sun gaze, and don't go stare at the sun, you can't just do it. You got to learn how to do it, or you'll get injured, and you might not be able to reverse your injury. It's like hot water. If you get into it too quick, you could be seriously burned. But if you slowly get in, you could be okay. It does look at times like a tunnel that you could go in. And with my naked eyes, I once saw so-called Mercury, which looked like a black dot. It looked like it could go right in. And my wife saw the same thing. We were there with our shoes off on top of the hill in San Diego, grounded. And it's energizing, calming, and it really does look like a tunnel you could go into. But if you do that during an eclipse, whole other game. Most chaos you'll ever experience.
Do you think that there's just a major separation between people happening right now? Because I just started thinking about how I would potentially talk about the second sun to someone that hasn't even realized that nobody went to the moon. It's like, think about how many givens of nonsense people are currently like underneath, where I wouldn't even know how to bridge this conversation, So,
well, maybe there is no bridge for that conversation.
Yeah.
It's the old Buddhist tenet, right? The Buddha said people are like lotuses in the pond. Some are all the way down in the mud. Some are a little higher. Some are all the way up, about to clear the surface of the water. Some have gone above the water and they're a perfect, pure, spotless bloom. And people are like that. And so the bloom cannot look down to the mud and say, hey, you dude, down there in the mud, get out of the mud.
Yeah.
It's time for you to be out of the, it doesn't work that way. They have to do exactly what the bloom did. They have to grow up.
Yeah, and the good news is, especially having children, I can say this for 100%, is every generation has to be indoctrinated, lied to, tricked, traumatized, or else they instinctively don't have that. Like I always ask my son, well, what do you think? He asks me all kinds of questions, and I want him to develop a discerning mind for himself and not have to seek from people. You know, that's just a good quality to have. And so he asked me, like, what is the moon or whatever? I'm like, well, what do you think it is? And a child's view of these things is much more in line with our view than they are with mainstream. And I think that that's the challenge that mainstream and Babylon or whatever you want to call it is going to be facing. It's almost like the Tower of Babel. Like every brick, the higher you go, the more impossibly hard it is to keep that going. Like think about how many lies they have to keep going now, and just one generation without the lies, and it's all crumbled. You know?
Well, my father did a thing for me, which I'll never forget. When I was growing up, my father would put on a straight face, and he would tell me a thing as if it were a fact, a thing that I shouldn't accept for a second.
Yeah.
But he would give me no indicator, and I would fall for it occasionally. Then it'd be like, you probably should have known better. How come But it happened over and over and over to the point where when he said a thing, I was looking him dead in the eye. And I'm no longer accepting it because you're being serious and straight-faced. I'm thinking about what you just told me. And what he taught me was to not be so gullible.
Yeah.
Just because someone as smart as he was, and he's probably the smartest man I ever knew, would tell me a thing doesn't make it that I should accept that.
Yeah, and Mountain Bear just brought up a good point. He said the child saying the rocket is going down is such a good example of that, where, and just like how you described it, it's also true that if older people or quote unquote smarter people tell you to not trust your own eyes and judgment, to not be so gullible. Like it looks like the rockets are going up and then right down into I don't know, the Bermuda Triangle. Is there a reason we're not supposed to go there? And
military bases, not aliens.
Yeah, to 100%. And so it's like that's why the Second Son stuff is so interesting. Not that we can know, but do you think you can? What do you think it is? Do you have any theories?
It's probably what the term spiritual son implies. It's the source for, or as above, so below. But think of it that way. So we have a sun and a moon, and we're below. We exist below.
Yeah.
Might want to call this place hell if it gets much worse, but we exist below.
Right.
And so there is a version of what's below above, and they interact. What we do affects above, and what above does affects us. Everything in this world where we live is a net and a web, and if you forget it, then you're deluded. If you're okay with watching someone be injured, then you have not learned the most important lesson there is to learn. That if that person can be injured, it could be you next, and it probably will be you next. And by the way, you have fallen for the Jungian ego thing, which we all have, where every person you see is not quite as much a person as